I'm just totally sad to be here at College of the Atlantic again. And that story actually begins with Craig Kesselheim, who said, if you're going to paddle a river in Maine, talk to Ken Klein. That's how it happened. So anyway, it's just great to be here. I love coming here. My wife, Ann Valisis, author Ann Valisis, we both love coming here to see you folks and to enjoy this great, beautiful, small campus. I think that one thing I have learned for sure in 30 years of writing about people and places is that each one of us has a remarkable story to tell of our own about how we got to where we are. And I mean that not just in the physical sense, but also in the sense of the journey of our aspirations and our dreams. And so I'm honored that you've come here to share some time with me tonight talking about one of my books, Rivers of America, which is how I got here, and the stories around it. It's a book that shows the beauty of American rivers, and it's a book that tells the stories of these rivers and how people have strived to protect them. And it's what I'd like to do tonight. I've told that story in many ways, but what I'd like to do in the slideshow tonight is tell you my story of how I got here. And maybe through this very personal tale, I'll also be able to convey to you some of the importance that these rivers offer to all of us. So let me show you what I've got here. I think we can have just turn all the lights out if you can. So what this slide shows is that rivers and I go way, way back. This is my proud grandfather and I, and a couple of carp that we caught in the Ohio River, where I grew up. And my grandfather was willing to cook the fish. My mother was not. She didn't want to do that, and she was actually correct. That sign was not posted when I grew up there near the Ohio River at that time, but it should have been. The Ohio River at the time was the largest barge floating cesspool in America. Pittsburgh was the steel-making capital of the world. I lived 30 miles downstream in the little town of Beaver. That rivers were polluted was a given back then. You can make steel without polluting rivers, but no one really imagined that to be the case then. And I was part of the problem. My first summer after high school, I worked in this steel mill, the Aliquippa Steel Works. And one of my jobs was to clean out these massive metal grinding machines. And I did that by dipping a bucket in this oily metal-filled sludge that would drain to the bottom of the grinder, scoop it up, so I got a bucket full, and then I did what I was told by my foreman. I carried that bucket across the floor of the plant and dumped it out the back window. That's how we disposed of toxic waste before the Clean Water Act of 1972, which Ken was teaching his students about today. Way to go, Ken. So it was a tough scene. And I would drive across a bridge here over the Ohio River every day and sit there waiting in traffic on my way to my 3 to 11 p.m. work shift at the steel mill. And I looked down at those waters of the dammed up Ohio River that was kind of all those colors of the rainbow with an oily swirl. And I tried to imagine what that river would have looked like 200, 300 years ago, before we had done so much to ruin it. And I'm not sure why I tortured myself this way, except that this was the other river of my youth. This is the other river that Ken was alluding to here as one of his favorite paddling streams. This is the Yukon River. Any of you know it? Southwestern Pennsylvania. Okay, great. Ohiopyle, exactly. Yeah, this is from the bridge in Ohiopyle, looking upstream at Z Rapid. Ohiopyle happened to be it's a sleepy little Appalachian town. My relatives, my ancestors, happened to have moved there in 1637. So I had roots there to understate, and my family would go back to visit relatives, and I would get to run wild along the shores of this amazing Appalachian River as a little kid, and I would just imagine, daydream about building a raft of logs and kicking off from shore and pulling my way downstream, leaving my boyhood behind to learn everything there was to know about the world that I didn't know, leaving the past behind and meeting the future as I went. And I remember very vividly still, one night, I was probably only 12 years old, but one of those balmy summer nights in the Appalachians when the rhododendrons are scented in the air and it stormed, the air was humid and moist and full of great scents, and I sat down on one of those big rocks along the Youghiogheny and leaned back against another one and just listened to that rapid flow. And I became mesmerized by that current. And the rest of the world disappeared. It could have been 1,000 miles away. It was just me and the river. And I realized then that something I had never thought of before, and that was that this place was perfect. And I knew why it was perfect because I had seen the Ohio River in its condition. The Youghiogheny was perfect for the simple reason that we had left it alone. It was natural. So there at a really early age, somehow the spirit of flowing water had poured into my soul. And I wanted more. I didn't know how I was going to get it, but I wanted more. I went away to college and had the great fortune to meet this man, Dr. Peter Fletcher, a forestry professor at Penn State University. This was 1970. I had been the director of the original Earth Day movement at Penn State in 1970 and had also designed a bicycle trail system for the State College, Pennsylvania region. I was presenting the plans for this bike trail system. Now we call this a greenway. We didn't even have the name for it back then. But I was presenting this plan to a group of adults in State College, and after I was done, this man walked out of the audience and said, "Tim, how would you like to work on a watershed-based plan for ecological protection of Pine Creek, a river being studied for the National Wild and Scenic River System?" And I didn't even know what half of that meant. But I said, sure, I'll do that. I jumped at the opportunity. And I moved up to Pine Creek for part of the time. I fell in love with this amazing Appalachian River. Got to canoe down the stream and collect all the information I thought would be needed for a plan about the river. And I'm getting, is that scratching sound annoying? That might be feedback from me being so close. That's better, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So anyway, I fell in love with this place. Pete's idea was to clean up the water. It was beginning to be polluted from things like open dumps like this, dump trash here. And he wanted me to do a plan for how to protect the landscape along that river, especially the riverfront. So being a landscape architect, I knew how to start. I collected information. We did maps. The map was actually about the size of what you see there. This was the original GIS project before computers existed at our level. I did it all by hand, which was actually kind of a remarkable experience, plotting out each one of those wild areas on this map, which we wanted to protect for their obvious habitat value. Did a lot of overlays like this. I began to really be familiar and knowledgeable about the stream and its environment and everything, the physical nature of it. But I didn't have a clue about the political and the social difficulties awaiting in my path on the trajectory of protecting the stream. For example, I had no idea how hard it would be telling these two guys, actually it's three guys if you look closely. Do you see the third guy? Convincing them of the importance of the Nature Conservancy coming in and buying up private land along the river to protect it from development. But I learned at an early phase of my work there the importance of telling stories about rivers, because only with stories do people get the importance of a place. And I realized the importance of showing the beauty of rivers, because only in seeing that do we realize the value of a place. When I finished school, Trout Unlimited gave me $2,000 to implement the plan. That would really go a long way today, right? $2,000, I was thrilled. I moved up to Pine Creek full-time to put the plan into effect, and one of the first things I did was to get the state to adopt a natural area status. It's like wilderness in the federal land system for the whole west side of Pine Creek over there, so that Today you can go back and this amazing natural area still exists there. Beautiful northern hardwoods and riverfront. I got to live in a little cabin along Trout Run here. I had no electricity, I had no plumbing, I didn't want either. I dipped a bucket into the stream and drank it for my drinking water. And I loved that, but the best thing of all was I got to learn how to canoe. First I borrowed a canoe from a friend back in State College and paddled back and forth because my cabin was on the other side of the river from the road. And then I bought my own canoe, so there I am with a smile on my face and my dog in the front of the boat, cruising down the stream. And somehow I made it onto the cover of Canoe magazine. I probably look a little more competent there than I really was. I think it's a trick of the photographer and the magazine designer, because this was also a scene of that era. How many of you see the canoe in this picture?
Oh, yeah.
A couple of boaters do.
Wow.
Here's the canoe. That's the gunnel, it ends right there. This is what we boaters call a wrap. I had been coming down the river, I hit this rock, I leaned the wrong way, it filled with water, it sunk the more I worked to get it up, the deeper it went into this undercut rock. I managed to get out and get my dog out, but not by a big margin. When I say I'm happy to be here tonight, I really mean it. I ran out and 3 miles out and got my brother, and he came and we rigged up a block and tackle and pulled the boat off. And hey, it was a little bit slithered up, but no huge problem. I stomped it out. I ended up splicing the gunnels in 12 places, using it for another 10 years. Actually, until I did a trip, I was guiding a trip for a group called American Rivers. I was on the board of the group at the time, and another one of the board members happened to be the owner of this canoe company, Mad River Canoes in Vermont. And we were having lunch one day and eating our sandwiches along the river, and she looked at my canoe, which had all these splices in the gunnels. She finally said, "Tim, I want to give you a big discount on a new canoe." And I said, well, Kay Henry was her name. Kay, I don't really need a new canoe, and besides, this just shows how durable Mad River canoes are, don't you think? And she just shook her head and said, "Tim, you know nothing about marketing." Which was true then and still is. I went to work then for the county planning agency, where I had done the Pine Creek work, and I realized how much broader were the connections between all the land and water issues. For example, we had strip mines for coal, and here's what they did to the rivers. This is the west branch of the Susquehanna River, sterilized. No invertebrates, no bugs, no fish, no nothing. Sterilized by acid mine drainage. Now we face similar threats of this kind from natural gas fracking in northern Pennsylvania. We're just kind of recovering from the strip mine era when the fracking wave hit. And you'd think we would have learned something by 100 years of mistakes, but no, it's just gung-ho again. The state of Pennsylvania, fortunately, has come around slightly with a new governor on this issue, but a whole new round of the same problems. I managed to get new strip mine permits stopped in our county. The strip miners tried to get me fired from my job. The most important thing I learned was the importance of flooding to rivers. This is Pine Creek at a normal summer flow. Here we are at the height of the Hurricane Agnes flood in 1972. Some of you might remember that enormous flood. And I realized that floods do incredible amounts of private and public damage to private and public property unnecessarily because we built so many structures in the floodplain where that should be open space. I also realized that the floodplains and the riverfront just happen to be the most important place for wildlife habitat. So if you want to do one thing to protect a river, protect the floodplain from new development. I launched a program as a chief planner for the county at the time to zone the floodplain of our 52 local municipalities, and within 2 years we did it, so that lowlands like this would not be built on. I worked on a lot of little streams and kind of pieces of the problem, but I kind of hungered to see the big picture for my local river system. So the next summer, Several of us launched canoes as far up as we could go on the west branch of the Susquehanna River, and my great pal Bob Banks and I floated the whole way to the Chesapeake Bay, 250 miles. And the length of this journey and everything we saw really tied together so much that had been in my mind and in my experience about rivers. But I think most important, day after day, paddling downriver, we kind of entered that amazing realm of river time, the time governed by the sunrise and the sunset and the calm mornings followed by windy afternoons and the pull and riffle sequence over and over again. And then every night sleeping under that big dome of stars and sycamore limbs. There's absolutely nothing like it. Many of you probably know that feeling. We got to see all the complexities of a big river in the east, how everything we do to the land affects the water, whether it's strip mines or highways or development or protection programs. At the bottom end of the Susquehanna, there were 6 dams. We'd run into signs like this, and the power companies on them would carry us around, some of them. We carried our own way around others. We got to see the effect of those in stopping migrating anadromous fish, like blueback herring and shad. This happens to be a Chinook salmon where they can still get upriver on the Rogue River in Oregon, but they couldn't there on the Susquehanna. Now they have some fish passage facilities there, but they didn't at that time. We finally emerged in Chesapeake Bay, and our awareness of this river and of everything river related was just so much greater because we had seen it from beginning to end. And my interest grew to include rivers everywhere. At that time, this was still the mid-70s. The big dam building era in America was still in full swing. There were hundreds of big dams being built, planned, designed all over the country. So I decided to do a photo project collecting pictures of these places that were to be dammed, these doomed rivers, if you will, because you would never be able to see them again. So I took a year off without pay from my planning job, traveled around the country to take pictures of dam sites. Here's the Jackson River in Virginia, later flooded by Gathright Dam. That's a big reservoir now. The Applegate River in Oregon, flooded under justification that was entirely based on nothing but speculative development on the floodplain. All they had to do was zone the floodplain. But instead of that, they spent millions and millions of dollars destroying a beautiful river. And most poignant of all, the Stanislaw River in the Sierra Nevada foothills. At the time, the most floated whitewater in the West, the deepest limestone canyon on the West Coast, an incredibly beautiful place. More whitewater use there than anywhere at the time, a place that brought people joy in a way that no other place on earth could possibly do. Yet New Melones Dam was built downstream 700 feet high. A group called Friends of the River worked for years trying to stop it. They failed because the dam building organization funded by the contractors for the dam itself had an ad campaign that addressed one statewide initiative with the slogan, "Save the River, Vote No" on 13. That was a vote to build the dam. But people were fooled and voted the wrong way. And so the dam got built, the water was backing up, and we ended up losing that amazing place and watching the floodwaters rise foot by agonizing foot for a whole summer as they came up, covering over this magical place that we all knew and loved so much. And fending off despair, or at least trying to, many of us resolved that never again would a place as special as the Stanislaw be destroyed again in our lifetimes. And I soon had the opportunity to put that resolve to work on the Kings River, just south of there. Another incredible stream of the Sierra Nevada. It begins at 11,000 feet in Kings Canyon National Park. Cuts the deepest canyon in America, far deeper than the Grand Canyon itself. It's the finest large trout fishery in California. But down in the lower reaches, a 500-foot tall dam was proposed by the Kings River Conservation District, which was a dam building agency, and a group of trout fishermen. They organized under the banner of Committee to Save the Kings River. They hired me as the writer and publicist for the campaign. Within 1 year, we went from a seriously threatened river to a river protected in the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. So that now we can all go back there and see this amazing place just the way it has always been. I realized that rivers all over the country, not just Pine Creek and the Susquehanna and the Kings and Stanislaw were threatened, but rivers everywhere were. And so I began to take my photography a little more seriously, especially on long river trips. Here's the Salmon River of Idaho, where I launched a raft trip, 42 days long, 420 miles. It goes past 8 major subranges of the Rocky Mountains, follows along the Continental Divide, then cuts across the wilderness heart of Idaho, finally ending in the slack water of 8 back-to-back dams on the Lower Snake and the Columbia River. These are the dams that block what was once the greatest runs of Chinook salmon in the world, has made them an endangered species today. There's a group called the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition working hard to dismantle 4 of those 8 dams that provide very little benefit but essentially doom the salmon. And then my wife Ann and I launched a trip on the Green River, the other really great long trip you can do in America. You can put in at Flaming Gorge Dam, float 460 miles down into Powell Reservoir, first through Lador Canyon, and paddled her kayak here through some wonderful rapids. I rode the raft with all of our gear. Day after day, down we went. We climb up to overlooks like this at Split Mountain in Dinosaur National Monument. We got 100 miles of flat water here in the desert, which happen to be the worst mosquitoes we've ever faced, including Maine and Minnesota and Alaska. It's just not fair to be in the desert and have that many mosquitoes. And then into Desolation Canyon, kind of like a little miniature Grand Canyon, and finally to the confluence with the Colorado River, which is on the right here, and then into the big water of Cataract Canyon of the Colorado, very much like the Grand Canyon itself, down into the backwaters of Powell Reservoir. So another fabulous long trip, more pictures. And then after I got a contract from the great publisher of photo books, Harry Abrams in New York, I really launched a whole new effort to systematically collect the most beautiful river scenes I could find all across America, from the desert reaches here to the moist, humid, green Appalachians here in the New River Gorge of West Virginia. So let me now just take you on a little tour of that experience, of traveling the country, photographing these amazing places that remain, starting with the Housatonic in Connecticut. Many of you probably know it nearby. Here in Maine, let's really start in the northeast, the Allagash River. How many of you have done the Allagash? Amazing, yes. One of the wildest rivers in the east, the only one that might be as long and wild, is the St. John. Just to the north and west of that, and Ken and I have a St. John trip starting in 2 days. Ken has done it before, I never have, so I'm totally psyched to be going there for this amazing wild river experience in northern Maine. Here's the east branch of the Penobscot, which Ken was just talking about. This is the one that Ken coached Ann and I on where to camp. We carried around this drop, actually we carried I think 4 waterfalls, right Ken? And then we ran a lot of great rapids. There's Ann kind of playing in her kayak in an eddy on one of them. There's me paddling my way through another one in the canoe. And we got stopped by a moose here early on the trip, something that usually only happens in Maine. And then, and here's the main stem of the Penobscot, this incredible artery of the Northeast, second largest river in the Northeast, the most critical Atlantic salmon river we have left here, the lower Penobscot. There was a lot of judgment that went into which rivers I picked to photograph and put in the book, but one I just had to do was the Niagara. You know, it's not just a falls, it's a river. So here we are at Niagara Falls. In the Adirondacks, the Au Sable River. I was there waiting on this blustery autumn day, and when the clouds parted just a little bit and the sun shone down in a beam on those red maple trees in the background, I suddenly had to cover for my book, America by Rivers. Here's the New River Gorge in West Virginia, one of the great wild gorges, big water of the Appalachians. I went here with my waterproof camera and a life jacket, and I jumped off a big rock into the river with a camera around my neck, and Bob there waiting for a raft trip to come down, and this giant raft with 12 paddlers came by, and as it went by, it almost ran me over. As it went by, I heard a woman in the back of the raft yell, "There's a head in the water over there." So I got photos here right at the water line. I didn't get a good one of them though. Here's my favorite little river of the Central Appalachians, the Greenbrier in West Virginia. Talk about watershed consciousness. This was a great little campsite. I didn't want to go further back because there was poison ivy, so I camped right at the edge of the river here. There were some storm clouds brewing to the east and the north, but none where I was, and so I went to bed there, and then about an hour before daylight, I started having these kind of dreamy visions of being back home at Port Orford in Oregon, a half block from the Pacific Ocean, floating on an incoming tide. And I looked out the door and I'm surrounded by water. So I evacuated very quickly. See that little island there with the sticks in the middle of the photo? There it is when I got up in the morning. Just a couple of blades of grass showing. I had to retreat to the poison ivy. Here's the Cumberland, the second largest waterfall in the east, next to Niagara, of course, on the Cumberland River in Kentucky. The Black River with these amazing bald cypress swamps in North Carolina. These are the Rocky Shoals spider lilies on the Cahaba River in South Carolina. They bloom on the fall line. The fall line is where the Piedmont drops to the coastal plain. And so there are rapids there, and because there are, settlers built dams and power plants at almost all of the fall line locations, but not here. And because of that, the Rocky Shoals spider lilies persist. They need these rocky, aerated rapids of the fall line in order to live, and so there are only a few places where they survive. Here's the Waccamaw River in Florida, or South Carolina, I think. And these brown amber swamp waters, typical of the Southeast. I keep an eye out for water moccasins. I had grown up with rattlesnakes and copperheads, but moccasins totally freak me out. Now and then I would see one, and I'd also keep an eye out for alligators. There's one, just ahead of the canoe when Ann and I were paddling there in Okefenokee Swamp on the Suwannee River. We definitely did not go swimming that day. They're much more benign, the great white heron on the Withlacoochee River in Florida, sunset on the Wabash in Indiana. Here's the mouth of the St. Francis River at the Mississippi. This was typical of my photo shoot mornings. I'd get up at about 4:30 before dawn. I took the canoe off the roof, paddled up the Mississippi about 20 minutes to the mouth of the St. Francis, where I knew there was this thick willow forest where I wanted to get a photo right at sunrise here as it came across the waters. Then I became curious about what this largest river in America would feel like. So I paddled out into the water. The eddy was 200 yards wide. I paddled out across, entered the current of that massive flow draining 42% of the United States outside Alaska, and just began to be whisked away toward the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the headwaters of the Mississippi in Minnesota. An altogether different scene. You hear the tall grass prairie, only 0.1% of it is left intact because it's been so plowed up in the Midwest. But here it is along the Little Sioux River in Iowa. And here's the Cimarron River with the sunset like you see only on the Great Plains. This is the Niobrara, the finest river left on the Great Plains. The Great Plains mean flat water, right? I mean, that's what I always assumed. So I put it on this river 100 miles upstream, and it was pretty much flat water for days and days. But then this river that was 100 yards wide, or at least 200 feet, began to narrow down to 100 feet and then 50 feet. and then I could hear rushing water up ahead. So what would you do in that situation, Ken? You get out and look, which is what I did. The river ended up dropping into this, what I can only describe as a slit in the sandstone. It ended up being 10 inches wide. The entire river, which had been 200 feet wide, funneled through this massive underground cavity that I couldn't see. I was just real glad I didn't go canoeing there. And then I got this sky later that night. I felt sure a tornado was going to come and get me, but it didn't. It just thunderstormed a little bit. Here on west is the Missouri River. This is the river of Lewis and Clark. This is the White Cliffs section in Montana. And further west, as they did, I encountered the Rocky Mountains, and here's the Yellowstone and its lower falls. And the buffalo on the Yellowstone and Hayden Valley above there. I've been wanting to get a picture of buffalo in the river, just like you would have seen in the prairies of old. And so I was thrilled to find this herd there, and I ran down to the river and set up my camera and started taking pictures. And the lead buffalo got in and started swimming across the river, and the others all started following him, and I'm shooting pictures really fast. And then I realized that the current was bringing them all right to where I was. So I packed up my tripod and ran. Here's the Snake River at Grand Teton National Park. Exquisite view. And then to the desert, and of course the king of the desert rivers is the Colorado in the Grand Canyon here. 280 miles of boat smashing rapids. This is the big one, Lava Falls. And my buddy's really bad run there. He's going to hit 2 enormous holes that almost flip him. Then into California, a land of rivers. This is the second longest one in the state, the Klamath River of Northern California. Beautiful forested stream. And then the northwest, the Columbia, 4th largest river in the country, unfortunately dammed back to back. All of it but 52 miles in America, flooded by dams. The Olympic Peninsula of Washington, incredible place. It rains 200 inches a year. This is the Soul Duck River, where I photographed with an umbrella the whole time. And then into Alaska, where we have 25% of the river mileage draining 30% of America's landmass. Here's Anne rowing on the Copper River past Childs Glacier, which calves into the river for a distance of 2 miles there. That ice wall's 200 feet tall. And every now and then a big chunk would drop in. And Anne's rowing fast because you don't want to be there when a really big chunk drops in, because it makes these tidal waves that wash across the river. You also don't want to be near the shore. We're in the middle of the river, so that if a wave did come, we'd theoretically ride up and down rather than be faced with a breaking wave near shore. Here's the mouth of the Copper, 11 miles across at the Copper River Delta. From a jetliner at 30,000 feet in the middle of winter, you can see it's still like the ice ages up there. Of course, even that ice is melting rapidly because of global warming. The Tetchenshedi and Alsek rivers are these phenomenal rivers of British Columbia, Yukon, and Alaska. Mount Fairweather rising 15,000 feet from the water's edge here. Glaciers coming right down to the edge. And then further north, the Shinjuk River of the Brooks Range in Alaska. We flew in as high as we could go. Our little bush plane landed on a gravel bar, dropped us off. The first day I climbed up to the top of the mountains here. It's the northernmost, highest part of the Brooks Range. Looking at our route ahead, the river wound into these many, many channels and then into this ice mass. With my binoculars, I thought I could spot a clear route the whole way through. I thought, through the ice mass. So we went downriver the next day, and everything was going just fine for a while, and the ice then appeared on shores, and then it got higher, and it got thicker, and it got more plentiful, and then came around a bend, and suddenly there was nothing but a wall of ice in front of us, a little 2-inch gap of air and the current running underneath. So I jumped out, fortunately it was shallow, dragged the raft ashore. We camped along the river, actually on the ice, for a very cold night, dreading the next day because we'd have to drag our gear for half a mile across the ice. But then in the middle of the night, we started hearing these explosions. It was like shotguns going off. And here this is where we camped. There's the campsite right in the middle. There's my buddy's tent on the right. Got up in the morning and saw this scene, the last of the ice bridges breaking away, floating off downstream. So we just waited a few more hours and relaunched right there and floated away scot-free. Here's the Klamath River in Denali National Park, and a northern wolf feasting on a doll sheep that the wolf pack killed right in the channel of the river there. And it's a real wildlife extravaganza like we used to have everywhere. This is the Bronx River. 12 grizzly bears, or brown bears at once, coming there to feast on salmon. You can see the sockeye salmon coming up by the thousands in these semi-solid masses, reminding me of just what an incredible abundance we once had all over America. This was once the Penobscot River, what you see here, let alone the Columbia and all those great rivers of the Northwest. We once had an abundance of life like that in all of our rivers, many of them before they were so affected and ruined. Ann and I spent 4 days there watching the bears catch fish and eat fish and feed fish to their cubs and fight each other over the best fishing holes. We even got chased by a bear at one point. Ooh. And then another trip further north. This is the Conga River, which drains into the Arctic Ocean. And we wanted to go there to see the great caribou herds because they were threatened by oil drilling proposals in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We did a 2-week trip there, and here finally met up with a caribou late in our schedule, crossing the river there, and then a whole herd of thousands coming down the riverbank on the other side from us, again reminding us just how phenomenally rich this life system is along rivers that are still healthy. And then finally the Yukon River, this massive artery of the north. It's the 5th largest river on the continent. It flows for 2,000 miles. There's one town and a handful of Indian villages along the Yukon River. It's like going to the Mississippi River in the year 1750. And I did a 700-mile trip there. Beautiful sunset there, one of the spots. And it reminded me, again, of just how much we once had of wildness like that all over our country. It made me think back of my own experience, spanning this some 4 decades now, back to that day on the Yaquagani River, when I sat along that rapid, mesmerized by the flow. And I knew that that place was perfect, and I knew why it was perfect, simply because it had been left alone. It made me think of the Kings River, where I was so fortunate to work stopping that dam, so fortunate to join that band of courageous activists who stood up to defend their river when they were needed, so all of us can go back to that beautiful river and see it just the way it has always been. It made me think even of urban rivers. This is the Niagara River below the falls through a very urban area. Yet it's this massive, powerful flow that has all that energy and wildness to it, even through the cities. And it made me think of every river everywhere and how much we need them all, for the simple reason that our bodies are 70% water. And every drop of that water comes from a river or from groundwater that is intimately tied to the surface flow. So it's no wonder that rivers have this magic that inspires our passion and determination and joy. It's no wonder that I feel that, and my wife Ann feels it, Ken feels it, and many of you here feel it. The rivers literally flow in our arteries and our veins. They are a part of us. And it made me think back to another great river of my youth, Slippery Rock Creek in western Pennsylvania. This big wave there, just to me symbolizing all the currents and waves that I've been privileged to see and know and enjoy and to travel on. All the rivers I've been fortunate to travel down. These streams have enriched my life in so many ways, and I'm really happy here tonight to share some of that richness with you. Thank you so much for joining me.